Hey, and welcome to Bible 365 with me. I'm your host, Kathy Carter, and we are reading through the Bible in 365 days, and I'm using the One Year Chronological Bible reading plan. That is a plan that you can find at oneyearbibleonline.com. You would go on there, you would find the chronological Bible reading plan, download the free printable, and then read along with me. If you are joining me for the first time, I would love if after you listen to this episode that you would subscribe to the channel and then go all the way back and start at the beginning. My goal for everyone who is watching is to be reading your Bible so you can learn the heart of God. I believe that this is a book that is written by humans, but for the heart of God, right? By God's inspiration, if so to say. And so he's trying to teach us who he is, to develop a relationship with him. We hear that phrase kind of over and over again, that it is not about following rules, it's about developing a relationship. And you can't develop a relationship with someone that you don't know. And you can't really put your whole heart and soul into something that you don't know or fully understand. Obviously, we're not going to completely understand it, but we're trying to do our best to understand him as much as he wants to give himself to us. And so I think it's in some ways our responsibility, having such ease with getting the Bible, that it is in some ways our responsibility to use that which we have, that gift that's been given to us, or I would say by God, to learn more about him. And so today, we are pretty far in at this point. Today we are at day 132. We are May 11th on your calendar, and we're in the book of Psalms still. So we are Psalms 39 through 41, 53, 55, and 58. These Psalms probably, almost assuredly, are written by King David. King David is the king over the land of Israel. So there are 12 tribes in Israel. David is now the king that reigns over all of these 12 tribes. They take up the land of what is currently Israel, plus a little bit into Lebanon, a little bit into Syria, a little bit into Jordan. So there's a slightly bigger territory as well that they had at this time. And so King David is the king over all of them. And he is using these poems, some ways to comfort and ease himself, some ways to teach, some ways to share poetry, some ways to share music. So there are all different reasons and purposes for these Psalms. And he tries to tell you in the beginning sometimes what the purpose is. And we're going to see today the difference in two Psalms. And so I'm a little interested in what this reading is going to be. But again, we are starting on May 11th. And it is Psalm 39 is what we're starting with. So moving right into this. And if you've never read any of these before, they're poetry. So in some ways, we can take a lot of it to be true. And I don't want to take any of it to be false, right? A lot of it is true. But it is poetic. So you're going to see big language, which is great. It's amazing. I actually love using big language. So you're going to see very big languages to explain things. So he uses picture stories to really explain things in his poems. All right. So he starts out with, this one is a really interesting way to start out because a lot of his are very similar. But here he's at Psalm 39, verse 1. It says, I said, I will watch my ways and keep my tongue from sin. I will put a muzzle on my mouth while in the presence of the wicked. So I want to compare this verse 1, to verse 9, where he says, I was silent. I would not open my mouth, for you are the one who had done this. So in verses 1 and 2, so I remained utterly silent. In verse 9, it seems like he's among people that aren't his people. And there were a lot of times, if you haven't been with me in some of the other books, there were a lot of times where King David was run out of town. And so one of them was when Saul was chasing him. And one of them was when many years later, one of them was when his son Absalom was chasing him. And so he was sent away. And so this could be in any of those times where he wasn't among the Israelite people. And so he's among what the Israelites would deem the wicked. These were people who did not follow the Lord. They didn't love the Lord. They didn't honor him. They didn't worship him. They didn't follow any of his laws or rules or statutes or decrees. They didn't do any of those things. And so in a lot of ways, it says that he is going to keep himself silent. And then it's to the point where he says he's utterly silent because he can't say anything good. So at first, he's just trying to kind of like bridle or hold his tongue, right? He's trying to just keep from saying anything bad. But then it's like, then he just completely remains silent because he can't say anything good. And then he starts to meditate. And then, of course, he reaches out to God. Show me, my Lord. And at this point, I don't want to say bad things about David. So don't hear this coming out and being negative. But there is some waxing poetry here, right? Like, show me my life's end and the number of my days, right? Like there's a little bit of dramatic flair here, right? And not because it's not warranted, right? He might be like, uh, I'm supposed to be the king. That's the promise that is supposed to be to me. And yet here I am among these foreigners. I'm living maybe without his wife, like when he was running from Saul, he was living without his wife, Michal. When he was running from Absalom, he had his wives with him, but he wasn't living in his land. So there could be any number of reasons. And he's just like, it's awful, right? And these are some of the beautiful ways in which he says it's awful. Show me my life's end. You have made my days mere handbreadth, the span of my years as nothing before you. And so he's just reaching out and kind of pleading to the Lord. He's not in a really good place. So he says, my hope is in you, but what do I look for? Save me from my transgressions. So I think this is kind of why I think it's when he's running from Absalom, although there could be another reason why he was among people that weren't Israelites, but because he says, save me from my transgressions and don't make me the scorn of fools. Because he was running from his son. And so there was maybe some transgression there in the way some things were handled. We heard like he didn't really reprimand his sons and things like that. So maybe there were some transgressions that turned into the reason why it became the way it became. All right. And then he says, remove your scourge from me. I'm overcome by the blow of your hand. So God is just really laying his hand heavy on him and punishing him. And by the way, we don't see anything good that comes at the end of this, at least in my opinion. Because he says, hear my prayer, Lord, listen to my cry. So he's begging God to reach out and hear his prayer. But in the very end, in verse 13, he says, look away from me that I may enjoy life again before I can depart and am no more. Because these days that he's had in his life, he feels like he's being reprimanded and punished for his wrongdoings by the Lord. So he's feeling like a really heavy weight on him. And he's like, just look away so I can live again. Like, I don't even want your attention on me right now because it's not really really good attention. And so he's pleading out to sort of ask for his sins to be forgiven to get rid of the weight of this punishment. And so this is how this psalm ends. It's a plea to God, knowing or believing that he's done some wrong, recognizing that he's in a lot of pain because of what he's done, and yet wanting some freedom from it, or at least wanting God to stop weighing some of this so heavy on him. All right, moving on to verse 40. Verse 40, it starts at, I waited patiently for the Lord. He turned to me and heard my cry. He lifted me out of the slimy pit, out of the mud and mire. So this is the opposite direction, right? This is like, maybe it's a good reason why it's after Psalm 39, because it's like, that one he was hurting, and this one he's like, but I waited, and here you are, you lifted me up and out of it. So essentially God saved him from whatever was happening to him at the time. In verse 4, he says, blessed are the one who trusts in the Lord, who does not look to the proud, to those who turn aside to false gods. So don't look to anybody else. Stop looking to the people next to you. Only look to the Lord in all those things, because the Lord is the one who releases you from that. Many, Lord my God, are the wonders you have done. So he's just preaching and saying great things about the Lord. So this I found interesting. In verse 6, he says, sacrifice and offerings you did not desire, but my ears have opened. Burnt offerings and sin offerings you did not require. Then I said, here I am, I have come. I desire to do your will. Why I find this interesting is because this whole system, again, I always say this. If you've been with me, you recognize, or if you've gone back to listen, this system was kind of set up in that way, right? Like sins and offerings and, right, burnt offerings. These are things that actually God did require of his people. So these were requirements. God would say, I want you to come here, and I want you to offer burnt offerings. I want you to come then, and I want fellowship offerings. I want you to come now. And if you have accidentally sinned, you should do this, and you should do, right? Like there is this whole list of offerings. They come back several times a year for offerings. They have festivals to remember the Passover, to give their offerings. So why now would David say, that's not what you desire? And I want to be clear on this because not going too far forward to come back, right? Always, I like going backwards, but just to be very clear, God always wanted your heart. Always. No matter, there is no difference between the God of the Old Testament and the God of the New Testament. They're the same exact God. And God always wanted you 100% sacrificially, fully and completely. He wanted everything of yours, not just your sacrifices and burnt offerings. So he doesn't just want you to follow the rules. He wants everything about you. So here's what David said. David says, here I am, I have come. I desire to do your will, my God. Your law is within my heart. So he desires to do everything. That's what God wants. He doesn't want you begrudgingly coming and giving sacrifices. He wants your complete heart. Okay. After this, David proceeds to tell us how he's going to talk about the Lord in all of his meetings. He asks for God's help, as we hear him asking for God's help in so many of the Psalms. And then he asks to shame his enemies. And then he finishes up with, but as for me, I am poor and needy. May the Lord think of me. You are my help and my deliverer. You are my God. Do not delay. And so he's just like showing his humility, right? Always remembering that God is the one that offers the help, the one that gives the help, right? It is not David who will be able to pull himself up and do that for himself. All right, moving on to Psalm 41. Psalm 41, he starts with, this is just another psalm, so another song that David delivers to the people. So in verse 1, it says, blessed are those, and always these blessed are these reminds me of the future. So I really appreciate that we hear David talking about how the people are blessed by God, right? Like those that are blessed by God. So he says, blessed are those who have regard for the weak. So there's always going to be weak among us, right? Like it might be us at a certain time, it might be others at a certain time, right? They're never supposed to be left alone. And so one of the things I think that God was really clear about in the law, right? When he wrote the law, I think one of the things that he was really clear about was never leaving anybody to have nothing. So there are situations and circumstances that put us in a place where we have significantly less than. And it might be emotional, but it might be physical. Obviously, it might be financial, right? We might be in these places where somebody's really, really sick, or somebody can't afford this, right? Or somebody can't do a job, whatever it might be. God was always trying to lift those people up. And so he was always calling out to the community to hold a standard that would help those people, right? Those people were never meant to be left without help. And so David says, blessed are those who have regard for the weak. So we're the weak as well, but blessed are those who have regard for them. So those of you who go and help the weak, the needy, the poor, those are people that are blessed by God as well. And he said, so blessed are those who regard for the weak. The Lord delivers them in times of trouble. So the Lord obviously is always there for them. He protects and he preserves them. And then it says the Lord sustains them on their sick bed, right? Restores them from their bed of illness. So the Lord loves to help the weak and needy. And then he follows up and says, I said, have mercy on me, Lord, heal me. So David at one point was one of these people. So again, it's not always like just necessarily physically weak, right? So there's a big meaning behind weak. It can encompass many things. So he says, have mercy on me, heal me, for I have sinned against you. So he always recognizes that there is a way that he has fallen short. And so he's asking God for help again, but he recognizes his own failure to live up to what God wants him to. And then obviously, here we go again. I'm talking about his enemies. They whisper together, they talk about me. And then in verse 10, it says, but may you have mercy on me, Lord. Raise me up that I may repay them. I know that you are pleased with me, for my enemy does not triumph over me. So he knows that the Lord is with him because the enemy doesn't triumph over him. Because of David's integrity, you uphold David and set him in his presence forever. And then he gives praise to the Lord of Israel. All right. This next one is Psalm 53. And if you have been reading along with me, you are probably going to recognize, I hope you recognize this psalm. We read it like 4 or 5 days ago. So Psalm 14 is a psalm that David read, or David wrote not that long ago. That was a psalm. It says for the director of music of David, right? It just says that David wrote it. And I'm going to state that David wrote this maybe for himself. So David wrote this. And this one, Psalm 53, it says it's a maskil of David. So this one is extremely similar. And this one is to teach, right? This one is directly, remember, maskil was something teaching of importance, right? So this one wasn't just for him to be singing in his room or for those people to be singing in the worship, right? This was instructional. This was meant for people to instruct them about what was occurring or what they should be doing. So there are a couple of differences that I want to note. There's some minor ones, like the first one, chapter 14, Psalm 14, says, the fool says in his heart, there is no God. It says the same exact thing in this one. The fool says in his heart, there is no God. They are corrupt. Their ways are vile. Fine. Instead of the Lord, he says God. So there's just a minor difference, right? In verse 2, he says God instead of the Lord. In verse 3, he says everyone instead of all. Again, these are like really minor differences. This might even be proper English differences, right? So maybe because he was speaking to a crowd or making it, again, instruction that he knew he was talking to a bigger room. That might be why some of these changes are. Not too terribly sure, but they're very small changes. But this is where the big ones come. So in verse 4, it says, do all these evildoers know nothing? They devour my people as though eating bread. They never call on God. Again, that would be the Lord, but same thing. And then verse 5, it says, but there they are overwhelmed with dread. And then it says, where there was nothing to dread. This is different. So I'm going to read the 14. 14 says, but there they are, overwhelmed with dread, for God is present in the company of the righteous. You evildoers frustrate the plans of the poor, but the Lord is in their refuge. So here's where the difference comes in, because it looks like in this one, and this is where I think the difference comes in. It looks like in this one, he's segregating the evildoer from the Israelite, right? So he's saying that there they are, over there, the fool, right? The fool is over here, overwhelmed with dread. God is present in the company of the righteous, right? The fool is over here, the righteous is over here. In this one, I actually think he's talking to the Israelites. I think he's talking to his own people, and they're the fool because they're not recognizing that God is there. So here's the difference. But there they are, overwhelmed with dread, where there was nothing to dread. Then he moves on. These next two verses are different as well. God scattered the bones of those who attacked you. You put them to shame, for God despised them. So I think it is a call out to his people to remember what, and by saying his people, God's people and David's people, right? The tribe of Israel. It's a call out to Israel to remember, like, they're being foolish. They're acting foolish. They're turning away from God, right? Because they're forgetting what God did for them. And he's reminding them in these couple things, like, there was nothing for you to be afraid of. So there was nothing to dread because God scattered the bones of those who attacked you. So I think he's reminding Israel. So I just think that that's a minor difference between the two. So he just kind of reused one about the fool, which we already understand what a fool is. And I think he's talking about his own people. You guys may differ from me, and that's okay. And I would love to hear what you guys have to say, because this is one of those ones where, I mean, I don't know. I'm sure a commentary might say something and be very specific about it. But I feel like there are some small, subtle differences that maybe we just gloss over and we just think he's talking to the same exact person. But it seems to me like there's two different audiences. So let me know what you think in the comments. I would love to hear it. All right, moving down to Psalm 55. This is one of the long ones. Okay, so this is another maskil. This is another one where he's teaching, preaching. Listen to my prayer, oh God, do not ignore my plea. He's calling out. We see so much of this, and we're going to continue to see this. David is always calling out and pleading to the Lord. He says, my heart is in anguish within me. The terrors of death had befallen on me. So again, this is a time where, and I don't know if he wrote all of them at one time, or if just the truth of the matter is, if you've lived a life, we can say big things have come and gone, right? Like there are big moments in my life that I wish never happened, right? Due to my own stupidity. I wish absolutely never happened. But even in my good times, right, when there's things that that I have joy about, right? I wake up and I have a job. My kids are all safe. Some of my kids are in college. Some aren't in college yet, but some of my kids are in college. So like this is a sunshiny time in my life. My husband still has a job. I'm still married. So this is like a sunshiny time, like one of those like good places in my life. But I still have really bad days. There are days where I feel like life just isn't as perfect as I want it to be. Maybe I fought with somebody in my family, or maybe, not too long ago we had a really severe car accident. So, it's not an overwhelming, horrible time in my life, but it's pretty devastating, and it feels like it's the end of the world. If I mean, and I don't want to sound like extreme, but in some ways it feels like it's the end of the world. It feels like, you know what, just done with it. Like, let's just wash our hands of it, and I've had it. Like, I just feel like everything is hitting me on all sides. And seems to be where David is. And again, I feel like some of them we can pinpoint, and maybe some of them are just, I just woke up and it was this after this after this after this, and I just couldn't get it together, and it just feels like life is a mess. And so I just want to note that to the listener, to the reader, to the listener, that there are times when you feel like this, and this, I hope and I pray these are a comfort to you, knowing that it doesn't have to be the biggest moment in your life in order to feel like everyone's after you. All right, so some of the notes that I want to note on this is verse 9. So I like David asks, he says, Lord, confuse the wicked, confound their words. And so he's not necessarily calling out for their death yet, but he wants to confuse them because he sees violence, right? So he wants to throw them off. He doesn't want to keep them kind of coming after him. And then verse 13 and verse 20 really had me thinking. So verse 13, it says, let's go to verse 12. If an enemy were insulting me, I could endure it. If a foe were rising against me, I could hide. But it is you, a man like myself, my companion, my close friend, with whom I once enjoyed sweet fellowship at the house of God as we walked among the worshipers. And so I had a few different things I thought about that. And then if you move to 20, it says, my companion attacks his friends. He violates his covenant. His talk is smooth as butter, yet war is in his heart. His words are more soothing than oil, yet they are drawn swords. So it seems this could possibly be Saul. Because it seems like it's human, right? So he says, if my enemy were insulting me, if an enemy, were insulting me, so an enemy, possibly he's thinking about somebody that is outside of the house of Israel. This person is not outside the house of Israel. In fact, they enjoyed sweet fellowship together at the house of God. So this person was a follower of God as well. So this person was likely an Israelite also. And for a while, I thought maybe it was like a Christophany, or which means like maybe it was a Christ showing up. I don't think that's what it is. Again, I'd love to hear your thoughts about it. I think it is actually a human, and I feel like that might put it at Saul. And so, although maybe something else happened in his life and it just wasn't recorded. So, and then he goes on to verse 15. He says, let death take my enemies by surprise. Let him go down alive to the realm of the dead. And again, I'm going to note that the realm of the dead seems like it is not a good place. It seems like this living and enjoying life forever in our land, right? In the land that God gives. That's the good place. I hate to sound like that show. And the realm of the dead might be the bad place. And this is kind of just going with this because the past few things that we've heard have kind of discussed this area of the realm of the dead where like the wicked don't live, they perish. And this is where they're perishing. And then the ones who follow God continue to live in the land that God gives them. Anyway, so he's asking for that. He's asking for God to punish the people against him. And unfortunately, maybe the person against him at this time is a fellow Israelite. It's somebody who knows him and who has been with him and who also maybe possibly loves the Lord, but is acting in a wicked way. And then he follows up at the very end by, he's saying, cast your cares on the Lord. So he casts his care on them. And then he says, as for me, I trust you. So God delivers the righteous, punishes the wicked, And David trusts God completely to do these things. All right, we're finishing up. I think this is the last one. Yep. Psalm 58. This one is very unique. It's totally different. This is one of his mikdams. So this is, we did a mikdam before. This is just a poem. So it's just something that he wrote for them to be reading. And then he's talking about, so he talks about these rulers here. Verse 1. Do you rulers indeed speak justly? Do you judge people with equity? No. In your heart you devise injustice, and your hands mete out violence on the earth. Even from birth, the wicked go astray. From the womb, they are wayward, spreading lies. Their venom is like the venom of a snake. It goes on and on. So this is this like beautifully poetic language that he uses. And I want to say that because what I'm recognizing and what I'm looking at here is he's noting that people are doing bad things, right? There are wicked people doing bad things, and he's explaining them in a language in which we understand that they're really doing bad things, right? Like venom from a snake, pretty bad. We don't want to be bit by a snake. We don't want their poison, right, coming through us, coming into our veins. It's going to kill us. So these are bad people. They are coming after us. They are not just, they are wicked. Moving down, and the reason I'm saying this is because, again, I think this, even from birth, the wicked go astray. I don't believe that he's stating that very literally people are wicked from birth. Although, to rewind all the way back to the beginning, we do have sin because of Adam and Eve, right? So there is I hate to call it a nature. There is something internally in us that has turned from God, and then we need to continue to turn back from God, right? That's why God has done all these things. That's why God pulled them out of Egypt. That's why God meets with people every day. That's why God gave his law. That's why God gave his prophets. That's why God gave Jesus. That's why Jesus died for all of our sins, and that's why Jesus was resurrected, right, all over again. So God did all of that for us, those things that we are completely unable to do. But I don't think that it is from birth that they are wicked and they are unable to follow the Lord, right? And I'm saying that because in here it seems like, oh, well, some people are just born wicked and some people are born righteous. And I'm gonna say that he's using language that is meant to imply that they've always been wicked. They've done wicked things for so long, right? That there's wickedness like all like kind of throughout them, right? That they seem like they've been wicked from birth. And I know it doesn't use the word seem. I'm just going with contextually what it seems like it makes sense, right? Because it says, break the teeth in their mouth, O God. So again, poetic language, right? Visual language. Tear the fangs out of those lions, because they're lions. They're ripping people apart. They're vicious. Take anything that can be used, their weapons used to hurt us, to hurt the righteous. Let them vanish like water that flows away. May they be like a slug that melts away as it moves along, like a stillborn child that never sees the sun. All these very visual ways of keeping them from hurting anybody else, right? And in other ways, I want to say killing them, but it's a little bit of that, but it's a little bit of like just keeping them, making them impotent. I think that's the word I'm looking for. Making them impotent, unable to do any of the deeds that they want to do. And then it says, the righteous will be glad when they are avenged. Verse 11 says, then the people will say, surely the righteous still are rewarded. Surely there is a God who judges the earth. So when we see that the wicked have been punished and the righteous, those who follow the Lord, have been blessed, there's a recognition that we see that God reigns on the earth. God is still here and he is still working for those that he loves. And I feel like that's a really positive thing and a really positive way for us to end, because that's the end of the day today. So for those of you who like this and want to hit the like button, I want you to hit the like button. I want you to share it with people. And I want you to subscribe to the channel so it will come to you every day. I do these every day, and I share these with you, and I'm hoping you're doing your reading every day. So on that note, I will see you guys tomorrow. Keep reading your Bible.